This is HTML lesson number 160. And I know you're not seeing me right now, and that's perfectly fine, because I have a ton of illustrations for you to look at throughout this entire video. So you'll see a lot of things, okay? And secondly, I hope personally this will be the last time on this particular video series where I will have to come on the air and speak audio to you, okay? From lesson number 78 all the way until lesson 159, I didn't have any audio at all. But in the last lesson, I had to give you some audio, and I have to give you some audio on this one too. But next time, I don't foresee any need for it. But if I do foresee a need, I'll provide you with audio. Otherwise, you should be able to just read what's on the screen and go on from there. And I'm well aware of HTML lesson number 110, and if enough people ask me about it, I will provide a manuscript of it so you can actually read what I actually put on the screen. Okay? So keep that in mind. Alright. The reason I'm providing this audio is because JSON, as you see on your screen right now, I did say JSON on there, okay, is a difficult topic, and it needs to be explained in an audio way, okay, with illustrations, of course. So, what is JSON? Okay, JSON is actually an acronym for the JavaScript Object Notation. Now, you noticed a couple things there right off the bat, okay, and you should have. We're talking about JavaScript, okay? What have we been using since way back in the day? We've been using JavaScript to actually perform tasks on your web page, okay? You used to have what we called static web pages. What appeared is what appeared, and that was that. Then came dynamic web pages. And when you started having dynamic web pages, you were able to do things with them, like have little animations and stuff. There you go. Okay? So, first of all, JavaScript, which is the JS in JSON, okay, is JavaScript. That's what we're using. Okay? Now, did you also notice the word object? Okay? Do you remember a video I did not too long ago called the JavaScript Object Notation? Well, it was called the Document Object Model. Do you remember that? There you go. So now you have JavaScript, you have computer objects, and their notations. Okay? And this will play a pivotal role throughout the rest of this video. Okay? So why do you need JavaScript Object Notation? Well, do you remember in the last video, HTML lesson number 159, where I had you do everything inside the exist database? Well, the exist database is wonderful if you have a computer or even a tablet. But what if you have a smartphone? Try doing that in a smartphone. You have to have a lot of memory in your smartphone to do that. And if you don't have that much memory, you can't do it. But JavaScript Object Notation can actually be done inside your phone. Why? Because the web browser itself contains the database. Now let me say that again so you understand what's going on here. When you use JavaScript Object Notation, okay, which is the JSON, the functions of the database are already encrypted inside your web page. Not really your web page, but your web browser. Okay? It's inside the web browser. You don't have to have a separate Java program and Exist program and like 20 different other programs to go along with it. Because in the old days, if you wanted to run a database, you had to have extra software. You don't anymore. So that means that since your web browser in your phone can do this, you can do this anytime you like. Isn't that great? Alright. Are there downsides to JSON? Yes, there are, and I'll explain that in a minute. Okay? But the upside is you can do this with your phone. So there you go. Now, the JavaScript object notation, otherwise known as JSON, is a subset of JavaScript. Okay, it's in your web browser, so you've got it. Okay. Now, I have put a link. I put a link down here in the description of this video to, if you did not understand document object notation or objects and properties and methods, you can take a look at that video, and there's a few others on my channel. You can take a look at that, and you'll understand the document object model, and you'll understand objects and properties and methods and all this other goody stuff. Okay? Now, the next illustration I'm showing you here, okay, is a set of curly brackets. Okay? It's a set of curly brackets. You're going to use this a lot in JavaScript object notation. And the reason why is because you're literally creating objects. You're creating JavaScript objects. That's what you're creating. Okay? Now, if you start seeing braces, braces indicates an array of objects. Okay? So you'll have your curly brackets, which will be objects, and then you'll have straight up braces for arrays of objects. Okay? Now, you will see an actual project I'm working on right now, and I'm going to borrow from this current project some of the code and make it another project, which I'll use in HTML lesson number 161. Yeah. So you can actually borrow code from this program and use it for another program. Isn't that great? Okay. Now, we are still working with XHTML. Okay. And the reason why we're working with XHTML is because we're working with SVG. And you have to have all these wonderful namespaces. Okay. So, what I'm showing you right now on your screen is the HTML code you're going to need for this JSON. Okay? But it's XHTML. It's not just regular HTML, it's XHTML. So that goes back to the days of the extensible markup language, which is XML. Alright? So you're seeing namespaces right now. Okay? Now, this project has things called attributes. Many of these attributes can be displayed using a cascading style sheet. That's why I connected this web page with a cascading style sheet. You're seeing that on the screen right now. Since we are using JSON, which is the JavaScript object notation, and a new fetch command for this particular project, I have connected this web page with a JavaScript page. Okay, so why are we using JSON? Because we can't really use XML. XML requires a database. This particular database is actually built into your web browser. Okay? So I want you to now take a look at the body tag. The body tag has an attribute which I highlighted with a yellow arrow. This attribute starts with a JavaScript function. But this isn't the only HTML tag that has an attribute. In a previous HTML lesson, I briefly discussed the HTML div tags. Now, you have to keep in mind that when you try to position SVG, there are certain attributes that will not work with SVG, which would be top and left, and you'll find difficulty working with height and width also. Okay, if you're going to use SVG. But definitely top and left commands won't work. Position absolute will not work with an SVG command. It just won't. So, you have to use a div tag which can use top, left, and position absolute. Without that, you can't do it. This way, you can actually position an object like a text box or a radio button above or below or to either side of whatever SVG creation you come up with. Okay? And that's very important. Now I will focus your attention on the diagonal line 1 SVG tag. Look at all of these attributes, okay? And I'm going to show you these attributes in just a second. So you're taking a look at the diagonal line 1 SVG tag, okay? Now I'm going to show you a list of all the attributes that are inside that tag. Look at that list. That's an awful big list of attributes. Now think about this for a second. What if you had to change any of those attributes in that tag? You'd be at it forever. That's why we need JSON, because we can use JSON instead and eliminate all of those attributes and put that in the JSON instead. It would be a lot easier to find. If you had to change something, you could find it rather easily. But if you think that the SVG tag diagonal line 1 has a lot of attributes, I want you to take a look at the attribute list. Okay, there's a big list of attributes in the battery 1 bottom SVG tag. What if I asked you to just change one of those attributes? You'd be forever looking for it. That's wrong. You should never have to do that. Okay? And I'm going to show you how to avoid that. This is why you need a cascading style sheet and JSON as well. That way you can separate all this data and find the correct attribute to change in the quickest possible manner. That way you're not hunting for everything. It's ridiculous. We used to do that in GW Basic and Visual Basic. Let me tell you something, it got real irritating real quick trying to find all that stuff. You don't have to do that anymore. Okay? And it's for this reason I wanted to show you this. I wanted to illustrate all this nightmare to you, that I didn't change all those tags. I changed some of them, but not all. So I could show you why you'd want to use JSON. Because you don't want all those attributes in there. You really don't. Alright, now we're going to take a look at my cascading style sheet. Now this should look familiar to you if you've been doing my HTML lessons. Okay, if you haven't, go back to my HTML lessons. Go all the way back to HTML lesson 1 and go all the way up. Okay, then I've already introduced cascading style sheets. You should know how to use them by now. And if you don't, they're not that hard to learn. And whether you watch my videos or find some website that'll tell you how to do that, doesn't matter. You'll see it. Okay? Now I'm going to show you my JavaScript page. Now, all of my previous lessons had one JavaScript function. That was it. Okay? But this one's going to be different because you're going to have not one JavaScript function, but 3 of them. And you're going to have instructions on the first JavaScript function that's going to activate the other 2 in a specific sequence. Okay? You're going to see that in just a little bit. Now I want you to notice the variables that are outside of all 3 of those functions. Those are global variables. That means that anything you store in there can be used in any one of the 3 functions. That's right. You can store things in there. You can read things out of those variables because those are global variables. Once you put a value in them, they stay. Okay? Now, let's look at the retrieve data function. It activates the other functions in this web page in a specific sequence. But before I show you how the other functions are activated, I have to show you a few other things. Whenever you create a function, don't forget to include the opening and closing curly brackets. If you do, your function will not work correctly. And as you have nested stuff inside these functions, make sure you have the curly brackets in the correct sequence, because if you don't, that section of code won't work at all. And I stored a uniform resource identifier that leads directly to my JSON page into the my URL global variable. This keeps my JavaScript code neat and easily readable. Okay? The fetch command tells the computer to find my JSON document. What is the first period then statement do? Well, once it finds the document, it will draw data out of that document and put it into a variable. Okay? It also converts all of that data that it just retrieved from that JSON document into computer objects that now can be used. And I'll explain that in just a minute. This data is displayed on the web page console. Now, there's a thing about a web page console, and I'll explain that in a different lesson. Okay? Don't worry about the web page console. A lot of times it's more of a hassle than it's worth using. Okay? But if you want to see an initial display of the data, you can. Okay? And sometimes that web page console will display errors that you would then have to fix. Okay? Then I told the computer to store the console displayed data, whatever was displayed in the console, all that data, I wanted it to store that data into a local variable which I called data. Okay? But I knew that I needed the data to flow from this function to the next two functions. So I told the computer, take the stuff out of the data variable and store it into a variable, which is a global one, called retrieve data. So the computer goes out, it looks for JSON, it finds the JSON document, takes the data out of it, converts it into objects, takes those objects, stores it in the data variable, and then it takes the data out of the data variable and stores that into the retrieved data global variable. Okay? But I needed to verify that the data I had retrieved from the JSON document was correctly retrieved. And the only way I could do that is to display that data inside an HTML text box. So that's why I designed an HTML text box. However, HTML text boxes will not display JSON objects. It just won't. It only displays text. So I converted all the JSON objects stored in the retrieved variable, the retrieved data global variable, into strings using the JSON stringify command that I before I displayed the data inside the text box. So you see it. You're going to see a command called JSON stringify, and it's saying, all right, whatever data is in the retrieved data global variable, I want you to turn it into a string data and change it from object data to a string data. And that's what this thing will do. Once you do that, you can see what data was retrieved from the JSON document. And you'll see whether that data is accurate or not. And if it's not, then you'll have to fix it. Okay? So, let's go back to the sequence, because when you fetch that data, you have to go through a very specific sequence. You told it to find the JSON document. You told it to retrieve the data out of the JSON document and turn it into objects. You told it to store all those objects into the data variable. And then you told it to take that data in the data variable and store it in the retrieved data variable, which the retrieved data variable is a global variable, so I'll be able to send that information from one function to the next in that sequence. And then the next part of that sequence was turn the data in the retrieved data variable, which is the global variable, into string data so it can be displayed in the text box. Okay? Now the next thing that this computer will do is, after all that retrieved data is turned into string data, okay, and then displayed in the text box, it's going to say, all right, I want you to activate the store data function, and when you do activate the store data function, make sure that you're going to take that retrieved data information and send it on to the store data function. if you don't send the data from the function you're in right now to the store data function, the store data function will never get it. You have to physically send it there. And that's what we did. So what does the store data function do? Well, the first thing this function does is it displays the data stored inside the retrieved data global variable. By displaying this information, you can see that the information got successfully transferred from the retrieved data function, and it was sent properly from the retrieved data function to the store data function. If you don't see anything in the text box, it didn't make it successfully, and then you have to fix it. Okay? Now, then the stored data function will store some HTML elements into global variables. After the HTML elements are safely stored into global variables, the computer changes the data stored in the retrieved data global variable into JSON objects. So if you'll remember, in the last function, all the data was changed from a bunch of JSON objects to string values, which can be displayed in text boxes. In this function, we're going to do the exact reverse. We're going to take all this string data and we're going to turn it into JSON objects. Okay? Now take a look at these global variables. As you can see, something is being stored in all of these variables. But what is being stored in these variables? The only way you'll be able to figure out what is being stored in these variables is to take a look at my JSON document. And now we're going to go take a look at that. This is my JSON object. Okay, it's really my document. It's my JSON document. Do you recall at the beginning of this lesson, I told you that all JSON objects are contained inside curly braces? Okay. And really that should be brackets, curly brackets. Okay? So the variable diagonal lines becomes a JSON object. And it's not really a variable, it's just, I don't know really how to explain it to you, but the words diagonal lines literally becomes a JSON object. But diagonal lines contains other JSON objects. Okay, so this object contains other objects. One of these objects is diagonal line 1. If you examine the diagonal line 1 object more carefully, you will see objects stored inside the diagonal line 1 object. The first x-coordinate object is stored inside the diagonal line 1 object. Now I know what you're going to ask me at this point. Why is there a colon next to the first x-coordinate object? Just imagine that the first x-coordinate is a box, and the number to the right of that colon is a number that's inside the box. The best way to comprehend a JSON object is to imagine that all JSON objects are in boxes with either data or other JSON objects stored in them. Or you could just imagine this whole thing being a filing cabinet. You have a filing cabinet, you have 3 drawers, you open one of the drawers, you have 5 folders inside the drawers, and then after that you look in one specific folder and you find your data. We're going to now return to my JavaScript page. Once again, we will look at the store data function. What we will store inside the rectangle x-coordinate global variable. What are we going to store in there? First, we will open the retrieve data global variable, remove the diagonal line box. Then we will open the diagonal lines box and remove the base rectangle box. Then we will open the base rectangle box and open the rectangle x-coordinate box. Finally, we will take the number stored inside the rectangle x-coordinate box and place it, that particular data, inside the rectangle x-coordinate global variable. As you can see, the computer follows similar instructions when it stores values inside of global variables. In other words, It's like going down a road and you go to the first point. You have like 4 or 5 destinations. You go to the first destination, and then you go to the next one, and you go to the next one, and the next one, and finally you end your trip. There you go. Now, another way you can visualize all this is to go back to that filing cabinet illustration I was trying to tell you about. Okay? You can open the diagonal lines drawer. Then you can take the base rectangle folder. You can open up that folder, and you'll find 2 more folders. So you open the rectangle X coordinate folder. That's where you'll find a piece of paper which has the number you're looking for. Now we will look at the draw objects function. Do you remember in HTML lesson 159 where we are starting to use the set attribute command, and we use those style instructions? Well, I explained that in HTML lesson 159. I shouldn't have to explain it again. So if you don't understand it, go to HTML lesson 159 and you'll understand it from there. Alright, we're going to make one final note here, and then we're going to go ahead and end this video. Did you notice the top and bottom of the batteries in my picture? Okay, take a look. How did I achieve this? Well, I made sure that the horizontal radii of those ellipses were twice as long as the vertical radii. And that's why it looks tipped like that. Okay? Now, take a look at the ellipse on my HTML page. You will notice the RX and RY attributes. The RX attribute is twice as large as the RY attribute, and now you see why. So this is what my current project looks like. In my next lesson, I will explain a couple of things. Number 1, I will explain to you how to get those extra lines. You see, I have that ellipse, and there's a line in the center of it, and it didn't go away. Well, I'm going to tell you how to get rid of that line. Okay, so it looks like that it's just one solid piece instead of some broken up piece. Alright? Now the next thing I'm going to do, I will elaborate on nested JavaScript functions. And the reason we're going to do that is because you nest JavaScript functions incorrectly, they won't work. And there is a little something called the return statement, which can actually stop a function from continuing on. And I'll explain all that in my next lesson. So, I want you to stay tuned for that lesson. It'll be HTML 161, and I'll see you there.